Morning, everyone. It is Thursday, the 7th of May, and we're going to be joined by Bishop Ric, who's the Bishop of Islington. I put that time and date on it because you're going to be watching this a little bit later, and there'll be announcements from the Prime Minister and so on that may well colour the Q&A we're going to have just now, but we thought it was important to capture Bishop Ric. Ric, I've said you're Bishop of Islington. What does that mean? What's your job? What do you say to people when they say, "What do you do?"
So, first of all, it's great to be with you, and thank you for having me on your program. My role as bishop, I'm not an area bishop, so I don't look after existing churches. I normally say that I look after churches that don't exist yet, and when I help to enable them and create them and plant them, then they kind of land up in someone's area, and so I kind of quotes hand them over to the local bishop. So I'm a startup bishop. That's how I like to kind of phrase it.
A bishop of startups rather than a startup bishop.
Exactly, that kind of thing.
We're in uncertain, unknown territory. We're all coming up with new things. What's your take, as you look around the country, what's your take on what will happen to churches as we move out of lockdown? What kind of time frame are we talking about? What kinds of things might happen first? What are going to be the lumpy bits along the way? Give us an idea of what you think the likely timescale is.
Well, first of all, there's so much that is unknown. So we are we've committed ourselves as a church to be a church that is working with the government, working with the scientists, working with those who are experts in this field, so that we are not just being careful ourselves, but also being an example to other churches and other faith groups, so that we can kind of move forwards together. I think when it comes to, there are going to be some things this weekend where things are being released, I think. And I think the first thing I would say is that it's not going to happen quickly. The relaxing of lockdown is going to be a slow process, because we don't want the NHS to be completely overwhelmed with new cases and so on if we go too fast with this. And having said that, I think the most likely thing is that, to start with, for us, not a lot's going to change. The clergy might have access to their buildings. We're not quite sure when that will be, but that will be the first thing. But the church buildings are not going to be open to the public for a while. But then perhaps in the future, there might be opportunities for weddings and funerals to happen inside churches again. Again, we don't know when the timing for that will be. And even then, it'll still be very restricted. And even then, another stage, if we're looking at some of the preparations that European churches are making, post COVID lockdown, as it's being released, they're beginning to start preparing for what it might look like in the future. And so I think it's going to be a while, not in the next, I'm not sure exact timing, but it's not going to be the next few months, I don't think, where we can all gather back together. And I think the main thing I would say is that, if you just think about unpacking what it might look like, people will still need to social distance inside church. We're hearing from European scientists and churches that that everyone will have to wear a face mask in church, and that singing won't be allowed, because when you sing, you project particles in the same way that you would if you're coughing. So they're going to discourage singing from church for a while, and that's, or joining in congregational singing. We won't be able to touch each other. We won't be able to give the peace by a handshake. Those kind of things. There'll be lots of hand washing. So it's going to be a very, very different experience when we do get that chance to meet together.
Wow, that's really quite sobering. As you see churches responding to this crisis and rethinking how they work, what are the opportunities that you see emerging? What are the good stories you're hearing from around the place that are showing the church really working and being creative?
In the midst of this tragedy, I'm seeing extraordinary things happen. I'm seeing churches really responding to the opportunities in amazing ways, while all of us, to a certain extent, are trying to work out in the dark how to move forwards. Extraordinary innovation is happening in the midst of that. So, I'm seeing churches responding in their worship by going online, all of us, very, very quickly, and having to work out how to do that in practice. I'm seeing churches kind of, reducing the size of their services in terms of length of time, but being much more adaptive and creative in the midst of that. I'm seeing churches reaching out to people who don't have that technology, but using things like WhatsApp groups and phone calls to connect people into worship services. But also we're seeing the midweek life of the church really taking off, whether it's in liturgical praying together on WhatsApp or in Zoom calls, or it's churches that are beginning to meet much more online in small groups. There's one church that straight away, they'd never had small groups before, but within a few days, the vicar had put everyone into a group of 10. He trained the leaders of each group to be able to connect with their small group by phone or by computer, and just trained them on how to do pastoral care in one go. And so straight away, they've completely changed the whole dynamic of their church. And we're also seeing the way that churches are reaching out with compassion in new ways. It's extraordinary to see different initiatives connecting with the people who are desperately needy in our communities. So one church in Hackney has given 15,000 meals over the last month, which is an extraordinary thing, just giving that away to people who are desperately in need of food. We're seeing other churches really multiplying their impact, encouraging their members to get connecting with their neighbours in new ways, whether it's in a large way or small way, just those little ways that people are connecting. We're seeing a greater interaction than ever before with our neighbours. And so this is a moment where I feel very optimistic about the way the church is responding in different ways with their different skills and emphases to reach out to the nation. It's like a spiritual renewal happening under our very noses. So we're still in the early stages of this. It's only been a few weeks that we've been at this, but it's going to keep on going for a while. So I'm optimistic, but also realistic about what's going on. We need to keep on innovating, keep on leaning into the opportunity that lies before us.
And in terms of being realistic, what are the danger signs for you as we head out of lockdown? What are the sort of red flashing lights on your dashboard, the bear traps that you can see for churches as we move into the autumn and then towards Christmas?
The first one I think is that we shouldn't move into thinking that everything's going to change quickly. It's not. We are here for a while, and so we need to be thinking about how we can engage with not kind of going back to where we were before, but leaning into the future. A red light for me is when churches say we're looking forward to going back to what we had before. And really, for me, it's like saying, no, it's probably never going to be like it was before. We need to be looking at the new normal and saying, how can we be like that? So one church is saying, we don't want to be an analog church with a bit of digital. We are going to be a digital church with analog presence. And so really reorientating that. I think a second area is in where the center of gravity is. The center of gravity of most churches is on the Sunday service. And a lot of staff time goes into preparing and making that happen well. The orientation, I think, is for leaning ahead is to say that perhaps the centre of gravity should be in the household rather than the Sunday service. And so the Sunday service then is a gathering of the households together. So that means that our centre of gravity, our emphasis, our focus will be on how can we equip households to be effective in ministry, in pastoral care, in disciple making, in evangelism, and then we celebrate those things as we gather together on a Sunday. And so we're not doing that now. We need to work out how to do that, but that's something which I think is going to be a new normal as well. So that's that question: where is the centre of gravity? Is going to be a great challenge for us as well to face into, and I guess one third one is there's going to need to be much more of an emphasis on lay people rather than professional clergy, and that's something which the diocese will have to wrestle with if that centre of gravity does move. It's going to be about releasing the people in our churches to be the leaders and the effective disciples and disciple makers as they can be and are already. We want to see that happen more and more and more. So that's a challenge to us as clergy.
Gosh, the revolution has hardly begun, has it? We haven't begun to come to terms with whatever the future is. That sounds exciting and bewildering and terrifying in about equal measure. Ric, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure as always, and I'm sure you'll be walking with us in the months ahead as we seek to discern what God would have us do. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Every blessing to you.